Okay, welcome. Talking about MVVM and globalization. Sorry about the delay. We had some technical problems. Apparently my computer isn't in a good shape today, so let's see what happens with it later on. But this should make it easier on you to actually see what's happening in here. My name is Tommi Teräsvirta. My title is Specialist. That's an excellent title. I can basically do anything, and it fits in. What I really do in practice is mostly I do technical trainings and consulting for software development for mobile platforms and then some others, including Windows Phone, which shouldn't be a big surprise since I'm here. And what we should do here for the next hour is continue with the previous presentation, which talked about data binding and things like this, so take it on to the next level. So discuss an application architecture using the data binding, so MVVM, model view model. And those of you who were not in the presentation, I have like 2-3 slides about data binding, so kind of like a recap of it. And once we've done the data binding, well, let's see what's going on in here. So data binding MVVM, so we'll also look a little bit on the MVVM tools. So first, what I'll do is also a demonstration of doing MVVM. Well, I'm not going to do it from scratch. It's been done for me before. Actually, I did it at some point. And then we'll see how we can utilize tools to do the routine-like things. At that point, things may get a little bit more complicated when taking up tools with the frameworks, but eventually, at the end, it should be a little bit easier. And then, in a sort of related note, we'll talk about globalization. So it means that when you have a nice application, it's well organized, it has good architecture, and you'd like to deploy it using different languages, regions for those. So how do you do at least the basics of the globalization in here? So let's get started. So data binding again. So what we do with the data binding is get two properties to interact somehow. So we can have one changing, the other one changing automatically. We can have one-way, two-way things. So we don't need to write event handling. So basically use the data binding mechanism in here. Just set the binding mode if it's two-way or one-way. So if one changes, the other one changes, but the other one changes if the first one changes as well. So that will be in here. And we can basically use UI controls, others, as long as it's properties, well, dependency properties if you're binding to something, but still basically between two properties. And in practice in this way, so we have the source object, target object, we have a property, dependency property, and in between something that's hidden in behind with the mechanism, there's a binding object which has the binding mode in it. So I'm not sure if you noticed, I'm kind of assuming at least most of you were here before, so fairly quickly doing this part. Now, we don't write event handlers ourselves, but we do need to actually get into the event handling. So our source property actually needs to fire a property change notification. And then when we do data binding, at that point, the property change notification will actually go in the binding mechanism with the binding object, and we will find the target property, and then the target property will change if needed. So this would be in here. Okay. And there's a demonstration not on the data binding, but on the MVVM, and at that point, it uses data binding, so we'll see at least brief glimpses of code, so how we'll do this, property changes and the data binding and other things. Okay, so that was the data binding. Happy with the speed, with the pace of the presentation, I hope. Now I'll slow down a little bit. Okay, so model view model. I've met people who thought I was joking when I said this model view models. It actually is. So it's yet another model something paradigm that we can use in designing our applications, creating the architecture. So the MVC has been in there. In the Microsoft world, there's been MVP. Both of these basically built on the layer pattern and so forth. So there's, in that sense, nothing new. Just slight differences in how we organize things. So again, we do have a view, so the UI part, and then we have a separation of the UI and the data handling logic, so basically the business logic that is put into view model part. Now, one of the main differences between, if you take the view model view controller part, is that at that point, if you have a view and you have a model, you have a fairly tight coupling typically. From the model, you fire notification changes so that the view can handle any changes in the data. But then again, the view does know about the model because it wants to efficiently be able to access the data that it needs to be showing in there. And then we do have the controller in between doing certain things. Now, with the model view model, we have one-way direction. So our view does know about the view model, and our view model does know about the model. But we shouldn't have any directions to the opposite side. So there's more loosely coupled application architecture when using the MVC model than using the MVC model. But anyway, it's still the same old in the way that we have just different parts, UI, data handling. So what the MVVM builds on is, of course, the view model, and the model. And the view, if you talk about Windows Phone programming in terminology, we talk about the page. So that's basically the view and the page. So there's the same thing in here. So we have the view. And then we have the view model. I'll come back to this one a little later. But first, the model, that's actually the data. And typically in the examples, including mine, you really don't have a model. So that's sort of like a weak point of any of the examples, that you really don't have a model. But it could be just any kind of data. So in our view model, since we had the direction from the view model knowing the model, we could have a view model going and loading information from a WCF service. It go into SQL CE database or something like this, and actually fetch the information somehow, so we'd have it locally or just cast part. But the view model, in addition to possibly loading the information for the model, it's sort of like the code representation of the UI. So anything we have in the UI that may change, we have a respective part in our view model. So since we don't have the directions of the UI, so we don't have UI controls. You don't have handling of the UI controls. And basically you could have a lot more information that we actually are showing in the view, but at least every single piece of information we're showing in the view, we need to have represented in the view model. And then how do we get the changes and how we get the binding? Tying in, it's the binding. So the data binding. So in our UI controls that we have in our view, we use data binding. And data bind the UI controls data. For example, a text blocks text to a property that we have in the view model. And that we do for every single UI control that can have its data changed. So we use binding all over the place in the UI in this case. And we can bind not just data, we could also bind behavior. So when we enter the MVVM Lite, which is one of the toolkits that we can use, so that will also show you an example of having a button click not handled in the code behind for our view, but actually in the view model. But for this, what we'll do is we'll bind behavior to a button. And then that behavior will eventually find itself in our view model. So that means that we can have even that logic in the view model, not in the UI. Yeah, well, we'll get that part a little bit later. So first of all, practicalities. What you want to do is you want to start with MVVM. You can take an existing application and move on to MVVM. But at that point, you'll end up typically in fairly interesting situations where you've been using, for example, event handling. Let's say you have a button click or you have a text box where its text changes. So you have an event, you have a delegate for that particular event, and you do some handling in there to any of the changes. And that basically breaks up a nice example of the MVVM. Plus, once you start introducing the MVVM, you typically end up crashing your application. At least I do. Not sure about you, but that's been my experience. So you get a ticket. So it means that you eventually end up typically rewriting several parts of the application if you have an existing not using MVVM. And you don't want to use event handling. You do want to use data binding. And one reason is that event handling, like I gave you the example of the text box, it's for the UI controls data. And at that point, you actually are touching the wrong part, because that's not the data. That's the representation of the data that we have or should have in the view model, and possibly eventually in the model. So it means that we should modify only the data in the view model, not in our view. Design time data. That's pretty neat. So when you have data binding in an application, it means that your data that you show in your UI is actually kept someplace else in the code. So it means that you need to execute code to actually have that data. And now take a list box, for example, where you're trying to show, let's say, a list of people. So the traditional classical example. And you have a designer working with a list box that's completely empty. They have to be fairly good designers to be able to actually have a nice, good-looking list box if it doesn't show anything. So for this, what we can do is we can use the design time data. So basically, at design time, show dummy data in a way that will be shown in the Expression Blend or the Visual Studio Designer. And then in the runtime, you would actually have the real data taking its place. So this you'd be doing. And now, testing, of course, you're all excited about testing, right? And having a UI and try to do unit testing on a UI, it's, well, relatively tricky. You do functional testing on a UI. Okay, that's no problem. That's normal. But trying to do unit testing on a UI, well, there are certain problems in that easily. But if you have a view model, and that view model represents our UI, it's only code. It has the functionality, it has the test. So it means that you can actually have unit tests, excuse me, unit test testing your view model. And that means that you're basically eventually testing how your UI will work. It doesn't mean that you can skip functional testing altogether. But anyway, you can actually have now the unit testing of the UI. So it should come up with a better applications. Okay. Tombstoning. That's one thing that where, for example, if I do a basic Windows Phone training course where we talk about data binding and MVVM, what I say is, okay, use the MVVM and your world and your application. It comes very, very simple when talking about tombstoning. Because if you have a little bit more complex UI, your application gets deactivated, your page gets deactivated. So what you want to do is you want to go into State Dictionary and store every single piece of your UI that may get lost when going into tombstoning. If all of those pieces of data are actually stored in the view model, what do you need to do? You need to store your view model, and that's it. So a single line of code for all of your UI. In demonstrations, at least. Okay, so yeah, if our view model supports serialization, we're lucky. And that's what takes place in demonstrations. So of course, in the demonstrations, when you're talking about MVVM for the first time, you want to sell the idea to the people. Yeah, which probably I should be doing to you guys as well. But it really is good, but just it's not all perfect. So it means that certain view models, you have to actually make sure that they do support serialization, which is the mechanism used when you're actually storing it into be it the state dictionary or then the isolated storage. And if that is the case, then at that point, yes, you are happy with a single write to the disk or to state dictionary, and all of your UI state is saved with a single write and also read. Okay. If you're not lucky, okay, so you go and you fix your view model. And then there's one place that you may want to consider is also where do you actually store your page state. So on navigated from, yeah, that's the traditional place. That's according to the basic examples. But if your UI is actually not the place where you do have your data, your UI data, so why would you do the storing in that place? Why not do it in the view model? But then again, in the view model, we're not in the page. So that means we don't have the state dictionary. So over there, if you want to store the information, you go into isolated storage. And at that point, you also want to make sure that you don't have, for example, a long, big list box which state you're trying to write to the disk. Because at that point, if you're unlucky, the 10-second time limit that you have, you don't meet it, and what happens with the application? It crashes. So yes, the demonstrations, very nice. Most of the cases in real life, very nice, work smoothly, but not always. So you do need to work a little bit with it and make sure that it actually does work with your solution as well. Okay. And then the nasty situations like using a DatePicker. That's actually not only with the MVVM, but especially with the MVVM. And why would that be? I have a hidden slide in here, but I'll show you anyway. So, if you have a DatePicker, so what happens in it is when you go and modify it, at that point you open a new page. You open the DatePicker picker page. And it means that your main page actually gets the onNavigated from called, and you end up storing your state of your UI. And what can happen next is that you can come back from the picker page saying, okay, I actually changed the data, changed the date, for example. Or you say cancel, I didn't change it. Or what we can do is we can actually move on to another application and have our application tombstoned while we're in the date picker. Or even if it's not tombstoned, we could move on into fast application switching still. And we also do have to worry about the situations where we don't go into picker page. We still leave our application and eventually possibly get tombstoned. And there's this one small mark in here. And the reason that red thumbs down mark is there is that when you move on to the picker page, you start your UI. In the picker page, you modify your date, and that date, modified date, gets written to that DatePicker control. Then you come back, onNavigated to, which gets called after you make that modification to the control. And then if you use MVVM and just reload everything from the state dictionary, for example, well, you just reload the date that was there before you actually went and modified it. That's not only with the MVVM, but with the MVVM, that's what happens typically pretty much always. So, for example, I end up writing all kinds of checks that if I'm going in this page, so it's actually picker page, and storing the information, old information in different location, and so forth. So, okay, interesting stuff. But you end up with it. So not that many controls, but there are situations where this can take place. And it's not only MVVM. Okay. For most parts, MVVM does make your life easier. Trust me, it does. Okay. So let's go see a little bit of MVVM by hand. And let's see, well, I have 3 projects in here. Okay, which one is this? Yeah, this is it. Let's just run it first. Okay. So, yeah, the resolution is slightly different than I normally have. So, let's zoom it a little bit. So you actually might be able to see something. That's a little bit too much zooming. 75 at least. Okay. So a very simple, very traditional application. It's not intending to show you everything that we have in here. But anyway, we have something we can type on. We have a checkbox. We have a slider. And we have a label, text block that actually shows the information that we have in here. Okay. So pretty simple to do. And if you were, okay, this one doesn't do tombstoning, but if you leave the page, now since we're just in the dormant, because I didn't do debugging and change the project settings, so it's always dormant state when you come back, so it doesn't do tombstoning ever. But with tombstone, it would actually, yeah, you just have to take my word for it, it would actually keep this information in here and store everything in a proper manner. Okay. So the way it's been implemented. Work, work, and work. Okay. So we have the controls, and for some of the controls, we just have the text. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So, how about back row? Big enough? I hope. Okay, you'll get the point at least. So what we have here is simply data binding. And the data binding for some parts and text for some parts. Because if I have a static label for my text block, it will not change. I will show the same example once we do globalization. At that point, I need to go into data binding again for this as well. But for simple cases, it doesn't change, so I'm happy with the text. But for my text box text, I actually have a binding to text box 1 text. And where this text box 1 text is, I have a view model implemented. So in this case, it's been named a main view model. And what I have in the main view model is I have a couple of variables in here. Text box 1 text, slider 1 value, checkbox 1 is checked, and so forth. And then I have properties that return that text or possibly modify it. And if it's modified, so at that point there is a notify property change called, which is a helper utility method we have in here. And this one actually raises a property changed event. And the property changed event is what we have here as a property changed event handler. And that's the implementation of an notify property changed interface. So if you are doing property notifications, you need to implement that interface. And that interface has this particular property changed event handler event. And then whenever you have properties, what you'll do is you'll fire that event. And this event is typically always fired with a string where you have your notify property changed. So if you do it by hand, like it's been done in here, you typically end up copy-pasting one property, another property, and so forth, and just go and modify the type, and then try to remember also to modify that property name, because of course the compiler doesn't check that you are using unique identifiers. It's just a string. But anyway, the code itself is pretty simple. So what we have here is simply text box, slider, and checkbox checked. So that's the view model. Nothing more to it. Just need to make sure that everything you have in the UI, every controls data that may change. And it's not necessarily only the text. It may be, let's say, foreground color, font size, or whatever. So whatever property we have that may change, you have that property in your view model. Okay. So now that we have this in here, and we have our bindings. So what are we binding to? We're binding the data context. And that data context is set for this page in the code. So in the code behind, we could do it in XAML. We can do it in multiple ways in the code. There's one way to do it. So that we have a private main view model, and then this main view model we set to be the data context. And sometimes if you go into simple manner, you can just use the data context itself. You don't have to have a variable. But the reason we have it in here, okay, let's see what would be a good font in here, is that in the onNavigated2, not in the constructor, but on navigated to, we actually set our view model, or check first if it exists. Because this means that if we come back from another page or another application, but so that we have been in a dormant state, our view model is properly set up. We have everything properly set up, so we actually don't have to do anything. So it's the fast application switching. So if our view model is not null, it's properly set up, so that's it. We come in here, and that's all we need to do. So we're checking for fast application switching, so application performance. If it is null, so we either did a new navigation, so we ended up creating a page a new page, or we came back from tombstoning. And that's the next check. So we're using the state dictionary in here. So if we have anything in the state dictionary, so the state count, so I like to use this instead of checking for individual keys. So just check if I have anything in here. So if I have anything in here, it means that I just came back from being tombstoned. And if I came back from tombstoned, I know that I wrote my view model to the state dictionary, so I just need to go and read it. And that means that in this case, in this simple case, those three values that I have, the text box text, the slider, and the checkbox value, those got written one code line, and they got read with one code line. So you possibly start to see at this point why it's fairly easy to start selling this idea of using the MVVM, especially if you first go into writing code for the application lifecycle and having 7 different values that you need to be writing and then reading from the disk. And we do it by one. Okay. Now, if we don't have any in the state dictionary, we just had a new navigation, so we created a new page, so we create an empty view model. And then in both of these cases, what we do is we set the data context to be our view model that we either created or read from the state dictionary. And after this, the data bindings work. So those UI controls data that we did binding refer to the view model's properties. Okay, so pretty simple. And on navigated from, even more simple. View model. Now, at this point, a quick recap of what we have here. So let's zoom it a little bit more, even though I can't show you all of it. So we have here a slider, and then there's a text block that keeps changing. So I only had 3 properties in a view model: text box, checkbox, and slider. No text block value. And I don't have event handling. So it means that in the slider, I don't go into notifying when the value changes by using event handling. Instead, what I do in here is I do data binding for my text block, but that data binding is to the slider 1 value. And that slider one value means that now I'm binding it into the actual view model, so what we have in the code, and that makes your life easier. And why does it make your life easier is when you come back, if you had event handling, your slider value changes. And at that point, you need to update your slider, or you need to update your UI control. When you start initializing your UI, one of the 2 is created first. And in this case, it's going to be the slider. And if I had it in event handling, the first time I created my slider, it would set its value. And at that point, it would try and go and update my text block's data. The problem is that my text block is still null at that point. So I'd have to start writing some checks that if I do really have the UI controls and all those other things. If I do data binding, that takes place when everything has been created and don't need to do any checks. Everything works just fine. And now mixing event handling and mixing data binding, there's one place that people quite often get wrong, is they end up with these weird checks after they crash for null pointer exceptions. Okay, really simple. So where's my model? I don't have one. I told you it's one of those simple examples where I actually don't have a model. Could have a model, but then again, with a text box, slider, checkbox, there's no real sensible model that could be created, so it's missing from here. Could have done like a list box, and a list box could have gone and fetched the information from someplace, a data service or something like this, and at that point, that piece of code that would take care of that fetching, that would have been my model. And then that model, when it has actually fetched the information, then our view model goes and tells it's been set, and then using data binding, it updates the UI, and then my list box would be showing it. So that's one possibility. Okay. So that's MVVM. Real simple. So that was by hand. Now, one nasty thing about by hand is, for example, having the property changed. You end up with copy-pasting. You end up doing all kinds of routine-like things. And then if you do want to separate all of what takes place of your data, for example, the event handling, not being a part of your code behind, not being part of your UI, well, you end up doing, again, certain things. So we could use MVVM Lite Toolkit and Simple MVVM Toolkit. Choose one. And these most definitely are not new. So it means that if you've done, let's say, Silverlight 4 years ago, a couple of years before Windows Phone, you could have used MVVM Lite. It's been there, and now it just happens to support also Windows Phone. So it's not a Windows Phone specific. It's the same exact tool. Simple MVVM Toolkit, it's a little bit newer. And of course, if you go and read that Simple MVVM Toolkit's page, it tells you that it's a lot better than the MVVM Lite. But then again, I let you guys go and read it. MVVM Lite has been around for a long time, so it's more popular. But I'd say both of them pretty good. So MVVM Lite, open source project. Installation, few clicks. just like if you go into the Silva Toolkit for Windows Phone, getting those. So it's just the install package. Supports Windows Phone and also Windows Presentation Foundation, Silverlight 4.5, Windows 8 support even in there. So they are updating it, that I might tell you. So, and it's been around for a long time. Okay, so what happens when we in here? So it integrates in the Visual Studio. So actually, after you install that Light Toolkit, you end up having, in addition to the normal standard, these application templates and so forth, you also have MVVM Lite for Windows Phone 7 and also for the Mango. So we'd have this. And then if you start adding things, you have a lot more with MVVM. So installs this. So creating MVVM Lite application is really simple. Okay. Now, the templates, yeah, they're good and fine. But only using the templates doesn't really get you far. Because what happens with the MVVM Lite is that there's a framework. And it's the framework that you need to start using to actually take advantage of the MVVM features. And it means that instead of doing what I just did with a simple by hand MVVM example, where I have a view model, and I just create that view model in my view using a single creation. In here, we have a number of view models. And the views do not directly create those. Instead, they use a view model locator. And then that view model locator is a single class that can handle all of the view models that we have. And then our view, it just tells the view locator, I want to locate a specific view model, and then set the data context to be that specific view model for that view. Okay, it's all kind of tricky in some part. And then every single view model, to be able to find them or locate them, they need to extend the view model base. So all our view models just implement the view model base. Then we have messengers. So that means that if you want to do certain things with your application, let's say send messages between different pages, send messages between different parts without doing a really tight coupled combination of two pages, for example, we could use messages. So at that point you create a message, you send the message, can be property changed message, can be your own type, can be all kinds of other things, and then sending those messages wherever you have in the application. And you register for certain messages, and those registered message listeners get the messages and so forth. So this also can be done. Okay. Now, let's go see demo. I was thinking of showing you two demos. One, I'll create a very simple application, so just use the template. And we'll see a couple of things from the template, what takes place in here. And then I'll have a couple of things that I've done with the template taken a little bit further, so I'll show you those parts so to get things started a little bit further. So take this one and let's create a new project. And the new project, MVVM Lite, Windows Phone 7.1. Don't worry about the project name. I won't. There may be something happening. Yes, something is happening. And that created me my project. And with my project, I have a main page. Okay. And the main page looks empty. It's actually not empty. What we have is that we have now automatically the template created me the bindings. So I actually have a binding to an application title property automatically. And it means that what I need to do is I first need to build my application for the designer to actually know what is that particular value, and then it can show the binding in a UI. So let's build it at this point. So here we have my page. Welcome to MVVM Lite. Okay. And actually having the data context. I'll switch these. Okay, no, sorry, not this one, but first this and this. So we have the data context set up in here. And the data context set up in here is that the binding to main and the source locator. So data context is set up in here so that I'm using the view model locator to locate a view model called main. So how do I find the locator? Well, for this, the template went ahead and modified my app XAML. And of course, the app XAML costs the application-wide resource. So over here, what I have is a view model locator. So now when I start my application, I have the application global view model locator. And for every single view that I use that locator from here. And with this locator, I find a good, nice view model for that particular view that I'm working with. So it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. But you need to get the basics of the framework. Okay. So the view model itself. Let's see the locator. It's actually very, very simple. Once I can find my view model locator, here we go. So the view model locator does not have to, in here. It does not have to derive from extend any specific class. It's just a public class. And in here I have my main. And actually having the view model locator, I have a create main call. And the create main call just creates my main view model. So that's pretty simple in here. And I have a clean method in here, and then I have the property for the main. So the property needed, of course, to be able to do the data binding. And now if I wanted to have another view model for another page, I just have to create that view model in here. Okay. So how do I do this? I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's not only templates that we get from the MVVM. It's also code snippets, including MVVM locator property. And the MVVM locator property, if I use this one, it creates me all the code for that particular view model so that it can be located, it gets created, and it can be cleaned up. So, yeah, the MVVM comes with the code snippets, it comes with the templates, and it comes with the framework, and you want to learn those. But since this is the simple one, and I have already made something, so in the 17 minutes I have left, I'll show that demonstration and talk briefly about localization as well. So let's just skip this part and close this and find me another project, MVVM Lite. So this one might be it. Sorry, that was actually just the one that I was trying to close. Okay, MVVM Lite demonstration. Here we go. And let's see what we have here as far as the main page is concerned. Okay, it's not really tricky. There's text block, text box, a button that does something, another button that does something in here. So if I run this, again, might be easier to explain certain things. So I can type away in here. Okay, being lazy, so let's switch on my keyboard, type stuff, and I can change it to uppercase. And then I have a trigger event button that actually sends the same, so it gets the uppercase in here. And it changes the uppercase, same stuff in here, so that does it. Now the reason I have these two, why they're different, is that one uses the traditional style of event handling, and the other one I actually have the behavior driven, so I have it implemented in the view model, while the other one is in the code behind. Okay. So let's see the example. So first of all, that's my code behind. So I don't have my on navigated to or navigated from bytes get. But anyway, one thing what people talk about MVVM is they say that you have less code behind. That's true. It doesn't mean that you have less C# code. It means that you have less code behind, definitely. Quite often there's less C# altogether, but code behind is really little. So over here what we do is we just get the text box 1 text and change it to upper and access it from data context as view model, main view model, and so forth. So that's what we do. Instead of going into text box text, I do want to access the actual data that is kept in the view model again, so a little bit longer in this way. So where's the other stuff? It means, so in the message box, that's kept in my view model. So I have a main view model, and in the main view model, I have properties like before, these created, and this one you didn't see. So this one has been created using a code snippet. So how do you create a property for your view model so that it can take place in your UI as well, and according to the MVVM framework. So that's created using a code snippet, and then you have a possibility to raise property change in a couple of different ways of doing it. So choose from the framework. So it gives you the templates. You just go and modify it slightly. So this one uses this, and the other one if you go into messaging. And then we have a constructor, and the constructor, there's a show message command is created, so that's a new relay command. So I actually create a new command in here, and that calls show my message. And this show my message, you might figure out that it's not part of the framework. That's actually part in here, and in here what we do is we go into the traditional message box showing. Now notice at this point, this is the view model. This is not the UI. This is just code that we have in our application. But since we can modify the data, we have the data binding, anything we do in here for the UI as well would actually have an effect on the UI. Okay. So how do we get our button to actually end up calling this? Well, for that you typically want to go into blend. Because this is where we start the button. Let's hide this so we can see it a little bit more. So in the button, this part is pretty normal, but then I have interaction triggers with the event triggers, where we have a Galasoft MVVM like command, event to command, and that command is bound to the show message command that I created and published as a relay command. And now when I actually click this button, it goes into the relay command to my event handling method, and then I show the text box. So it's relatively simple. Just the first time you do it, there are a few minor details that you might not be sure about, but there are nice, good, decent tutorials all over the place. So just follow those, and you will get started in a proper, nice manner. Okay. That was the MVVM Lite. I'll show you one small thing since I was talking about code snippets. So MVVM, MVVM property. So let's create this one. So that's how you create a property, and then just go with modifying the name with tabulate next one, and then all of a sudden you have your property change notifications take place. So that's fairly simple. Yes. Yes, it's the MVVM with the yeah. So I started just wondering, what did you ask? So you say, is it MVVM where you have?
Yeah, because you have business logic in your view model.
Yeah.
Is it according to MVVM?
Yeah, it is. Okay, so the question was that since I have business logic in my view model, is that how you're supposed to do model view model? That's actually how you should do it. Because if you have it like the simple examples, if you do it by hand, you typically have it in your UI. And one of the main points of this architecture is to separate the UI from the business logic. And that means that these things, in this case, okay, showing message box doesn't really seem like much of a business logic. But what you should do in the MVVM is that you take away this type of event handling from the UI, so from the view, and actually implement it in the view model. And now with the MVVM Lite, again, it's a whole lot easier than trying to come up with your own solution. I mean, reinventing the wheel is possible, and you might actually get a better job, do a better job, but not that often. So there's an existing implementation, actually multiple, so also all the other toolkits. So there's one example of the toolkits. So that's how you do it. Okay. Okay, so that was glimpse at the MVVM Lite toolkit. I have almost 10 minutes left, so let's move on to the next topic. Okay. So the next topic, globalization. So the global terminology first of all. So when we talk about in Windows Phone terms, there are some changes to some other platforms. So first of all, we typically talk about cultures. Sorry, instead of locales. Well, locales also visible in some place. But anyway, that would be the combination of a language and a region. So it means that if you have a language English, you still do have different currencies for the United States and the United Kingdom and quite a few other countries. So both the region and the language, so it's not just the language-specific information. And it's quite often called culture in Windows Phone. Then we have localization. I don't know how to do localization. Not even to Finnish or English. That's something that, in my opinion at least, professional language specialists should do. So, but at least in large companies, you have separate teams for localization and internationalization parts. So those people do it. What I try to say that I have fairly good idea what to do is the globalization, or internationalization, as it's called in some other places. So that means that I should be able to write my code that it is easy to localize by somebody who doesn't really know about code, who doesn't know about program logic, but anyway, it is then easy to localize for a specific region and for a specific language. Okay. But that's something that it's not just Windows Phone specific. Okay, so let's prepare for localization. So first of all, basic idea is strings. Every single string that you're going to be showing to the end user should be localized. And okay, quite a few other things possibly. And the languages that you create and the locales are, first of all, you have something called a neutral. That's a special language. So it means that if you don't specify any language, you're working with a neutral language. And that's what you set in an assembly info for Windows Phone. By default, it's set to same language as you have for the Visual Studio, but you can change it to something else. And then for the additional languages, then we create resource files. So you have one resource file for the neutral, and then you have other resource files. So if you're supporting two languages, English and Finnish, let's say English US, and that would be a neutral language, what you would do is that you would create a resource file for that language without the culture specification. So you would have, for example, my resources.resx file for that neutral language. And then for the additional languages, you would then have the culture information with the actual language spec in here. And then on the strings to localize. Okay, a string, one single string. Okay, it's easy. Possibly. How about save? It may mean different things in different places. So that means that you don't reuse your strings. If you have a sentence, So especially parameterized sentence. So in different languages, you end up possibly having the parameters in different order and all kinds of other things. So it means that you need to worry about a little bit on what you actually are the strings that you're going to be localizing. But anyway, you have resource files, and in those resource files, all the strings that you need to you want to localize, you just list them in there. So that's pretty simple. And then the localizing strings. Once you have those resource files, what you do is you set up a class that actually goes and ties in with the resource file. And you update the XAML to bind the elements for the localized strings. And this sometimes is the interesting part if you're using MVVM. So what do you bind to your view model, and what do you bind to your localizable strings? Okay, not always self-obvious, but you can typically make the decision. So we'd have this set up. And then you also need to go into your project file. So in the project file, you need to list in a place with a tag supported cultures. You need to list all the additional languages, not the neutral one, but all the additional languages you list in there. And once you've done this, and you have the language files, resource files specified, named, and implemented in proper manner, and you've created those, when you build, all the resource files will be built with the application, and all those languages will automatically be supported. Sometimes it actually is that easy. Sometimes. Okay. Now, localizing strings is one part. How about localizing something else? Negative currency values are probably one of the most difficult ones, because it can be minus, it can be in parentheses. The minus can be in front of or behind the number. And that's not even taking into account the location of the currency symbol. Not just the currency symbol, but the location. And all kinds of other things. So trying to figure out how it's done, it's a tricky one. Just dates, I mean, you have the slash or the dot with the separator. And once you say separator, you just got it wrong. If you go into Hungarian, there's also a dot after the last one, so it's not a separator. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to come up with a way of trying to yourself format a string or whatever you're showing. So use cultures. So the Windows Phone has culture information, and the culture information allows you to format currency, format strings through the string or through the double and so forth. And that means that at that point, every single string is automatically properly localized. Now, what I'll do in here is I'll try to find my MVVM demonstration, and I'll see if I can run it. Yeah, I can. So, application page name. There's a global information for the United States at this point, showing something. And this one, what we could do is we could go into modifying and looking into Finnish. So this particular application is actually implemented in Finnish. So going in here into the settings. Okay, it takes a little while to actually modify it. So what I'll do is I'll start ending this presentation in here. Pretty soon I'll just find my Finnish in here. Okay, region format also changed. Go, and I didn't, of course, save, reboot it. Yeah, this one you need to reboot as well, just like the real device. And yeah, restart your phone. But anyway, what happens in here is that you end up having a different locale for this one. So, but that application that I was showing, what it does, it uses the resource files, it goes and fetches the data, and it also modifies the value. So it uses a date, uses a currency, and also things like a decimal separator for a floating point value, which is one thing that's easy to get wrong if you have the format string of 0.00, like you see quite often. You just got it wrong, because at that point that dot is a literal dot, it's not like in Finnish, German, where it should be a comma. So you have possibilities, other formats for this as well. Okay, so I'll wrap things up. It seems to be in Finnish. So go into MVVM demonstration. We have our application, slightly different language. This one has a comma in here, so that's showing it properly as well. And then we go into the global information. So the display name for the current culture is actually Suomi. And we'll see that we have the dates slightly different than what we had for the US. And sorry, I don't have time to show the code. Michael is anxiously waiting to get in here and start talking. So what I'll do is I'll fairly quickly wrap up in here. So slightly globalized farewell. We might have time for one question.